Stephen, good to see you, man. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. Busier than I should be in April.
That is true. So it is NFL draft weekend. We're going to obviously talk a lot about all the chaos that's been going on in college football with conference commissioners and all the different things that are happening. Jack Swarbrick saying things from Notre Dame about the future of the game this week. But I want to get your thoughts as someone who sees all the backroom stuff happening. Where does NFL agents and draft conversations with players and prospects, where does that sort of rank relative to coaching carousel misinformation and recruiting misinformation and congressional misinformation? Like, where does the draft and what these players actually have to go through, how does that all fit together?
Are we ranking them in terms of like insidiousness or just or the prevalence of it?
Both.
I think the prevalence, it's funny. The more transparent we become in terms of like information platforms, misinformation abounds. It's just this exponential theory. It's very strange. And so I think now more than ever, GM, scouts, and the NFL apparatus actually have more of a means to, honestly, rat fuck a prospect in the traditional definition of that term, if they want to. And it's still very prevalent today. We're seeing it right now, as we record this, it's before the draft, but Thibodeau in Oregon has probably been the bearer of the brunt of that this cycle. And could still easily go in the top 5, could go in the top 10 after months of the more traditional kind of racist leaning. Does he have a love for the game type of narrative? And so I think fans and NFL consumers are more aware of that, but it hasn't stopped the process from happening because of the demand for content between, the end of Super Bowl and now.
Is George Pickens type of guys fall into that category as well? Or is there like where's the line on what's okay to say about a prospect?
Oh shit. I don't know. I wouldn't want to draw that, but I think that Pickens is a different beast because you're not investing. I think edge rusher is a highly disputed position right now. This is one of the things that I think has become, I don't know if we're talking about edge rushers the right way anymore because of the way the game has changed. And so, we were talking about this on Split Zone recently. We have this demand for the classic, almost the old school 3-4 linebacker. Like I grew up on Lawrence Taylor, right? Lawrence Taylor being like Jesus level Thor God on the field. And by the time we got to Mario Williams, Jadeveon Clowney, Chase Young, Vic Beasley, all to varying degrees of success, we didn't see world changing pass rushers. And so I think it's partly it's that position, but like, I think people are invested in edge rushers in a way in which maybe short of quarterback, we don't have. I think it is sort of like that quarterback level focus on the defense. In the case of Pickens, he's not projected that high. And I think the concerns and the conjecture are going to go way down once the financial investment does. But if you are a projected top 20 pick at any point or first rounder, you're going to be subject to way, way more speculation.
So we're recording this here on Thursday. I guess what I would say is happy Laremy Tunsil Day.
How many years has it been?
He's out of his rookie contract. So was it
16?
Which was a Dolphins contract. And then he ended up at the Texans. Mm-hmm. And I think he just re-signed. I think he just re-signed for like a fairly large number.
You would think I would have this information off the top of my head, but it was such an exhausting process for me in the middle of all that I kind of blocked it out.
As one should.
Yeah.
It's not really important what year
6 years.
I was gonna say I think it's
years.
Yeah, I think it was 16 or whatever.
Yeah, but April 16. I remember now.
So what we want you to sort of give people like the tent poles of the story, sort of an oral history of what took place that night with Laremy Tunsil, the actors, some of the bad actors, and again, have we learned anything about that situation that can affect kids going forward?
So if you don't know, I've made a documentary that was on a couple different networks for you. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube now. It's called, and I didn't name this show, and I think the name sucks. I can say that 6 years later. Foul play paid in Mississippi. That's what happens when advertising people get involved in the creative process. So yeah, that word soup of a title can be found on YouTube on the Secret Base channel, which is where I currently work. But throughout that documentary, we sort of highlight Tunsil as one of the narrative threads. The shortest version is that after having a really successful career as a tackle in the SEC that was sort of pocked by NCAA investigations into improper benefits that have now become legendary in terms of how small the scale was. So he slept on the couch of an assistant coach. He had a rental car for too long, like these kind of level of ticky-tack violations compared to, as we now discuss, NIL in 2022. That's the first reason this is dated. He also had a huge blow up with his mom's boyfriend / fiance that resulted in physical violence after the stepfather struck his mom. And so this stock Hollywood character, shitty stepdad, becomes basically the supervillain in the story. And there's information out there there's information that's damaging to Laremy at the time. I don't think even 6 years later, it's that damaging now. What everyone remembers is that on draft night, basically after really kind of ransoms were not met, Laremy, there's a picture of Laremy in a gas mask that's modified into a bong, smoking weed on the campus of Ole Miss. Shocking.
A college kid? Wait. A college kid was smoking weed on campus? Are you fucking kidding me?
So I made this show in 17 and 18. And I spent a lot of time on campus when I was making the TV show. And I didn't go back to Ole Miss after that, ever. Not as a purposeful thing. I just didn't go back. You know, I mean, if anyone knows me, I'm not really like a good rebel, as they say down there, nor do I give a shit. But I had to go to Oxford recently to this is like a family thing, but I was dropping off one of my kids to a grandparent. It was the halfway point between one set of grandparents in Jackson, Mississippi, another set in Louisiana. So Oxford's a good halfway point. If you live in Nashville, you know that, like, it's halfway to those destinations. And I got invited at the same time to speak. And so I was like, I'll do this. I went and spoke to an advanced reporting class. Long story short, went in, did probably the worst scared straight speech in the world on going into journalism. Like it was probably anathema to what they wanted. It's like, I don't know if anyone remembers this. Was it like the Discovery Channel in the 90s where they would take kids who had like minor offenses and put them in prison for a day? That's basically what I did to two advanced level reporting classes.
Go learn Mandarin and HTML. Go learn Mandarin and HTML.
I scared the shit out of one girl who wanted to go to broadcasting. At the end of it, a kid came up to me. Hey, thanks for doing this. I know who you are, sports fan, whatever. He goes, last semester I lived in that house that Laremy smoked weed in. And it's become, and everyone has this on a college campus. Anyone who goes to college has like these legendary spots that are like famous diners, or just a weird thing happens there, someplace you go like spray paint or whatever. And in Oxford, that's that room, which is just a shitty rental house, where he smoked weed with the Confederate flag as a backdrop because Ole Miss, has become this like sought after kind of folk legend, which is the reason I bring that up as an anecdote, is kind of where him smoking weed, that's the perception of it now. That's the impact of it now. That's how silly we sort of take this to be 6 years later. Now,
so what you're saying is not. What you're saying is if this were in Nashville, like this would have been Laremy Tunsil smoking weed in front of like a mural. Like yes. The Wings, this is like the Wings mural of Oxford, Mississippi.
Well, yeah, but it's like
or the Rock in Knoxville. Like,
yeah, we kind of grit our teeth at that in Nashville. I think the way people look at it, it's kind of funny. Any Ole Miss fan with a sense of humor kind of looks at it now, where it's like there's a sentimentality to it, because that time was so fucked up with the Hugh Freeze stuff, the Leo Lewis stuff. I mean, we made a whole TV show about it there. And then, the sex scandal with the cell phones and Freeze, like the Tunsil thing became quaint very quickly, because it was, hey, this guy got $100 and smoked some weed. Like, what? It's almost like if you drove by and you're like, that's where Rotiers used to be. Like, it's a sentimental kind of thing. Yeah. That's my Nashville comp for it. So,
that's perfect. Now, you were about to say though, while it is such a small, it feels such like a minute, small, irrelevant thing in real life, it had a far different effect on his actual life in the moment.
I think now, 6 years later, obviously the photo was leaked as the draft began. So I think Jared Goff was drafted first by the Rams. And then I want to say right after that, that's when it was supposed to hit. And I'm trying to remember, was it Detroit? I'm trying to remember where he was supposed to land. He was supposed to go no further than third. And I cannot remember. I mean, we can do this live, what the 2015 draft order was, because it was a big deal when he wasn't immediately the first offensive lineman off the board, because he had projected that way, right?
So this would have also been the Titans year where they had the number 1 pick and they traded back to the middle of the round with the Rams. And then the Eagles moved up to 2. And then the Titans came back and took a tackle in the top 10 ahead of Laremy Tunsil.
Took my buddy Jack Conklin, a former SB Nation Heisman candidate from Michigan State. So
you've gotten like 9 plugs in the first 6 minutes of this interview, by the way. Well done.
That's what I do, man. It was actually the second. There was another tackle. It was Ronnie Stanley from Notre Dame. That was when the panic set in. But he had been projected as high as going to San Diego. That's what it was. San Diego and or Dallas was talked about. That it was going to go. Wow, what a stellar lineup! It was going to go Jared Goff and then Carson Wentz 1-2, which shows you the sort of fragility of draft logic. He fell.
Hang on, both have gone. Their teams have gone to Super Bowls with those quarterbacks.
Yes, they have.
Just to point that out.
That's right. Technically, they have. Full stop, no context. So it breaks, I want to say, after the second pick, after Wentz goes, because a lot of people had Laremy projected that high. And it's the picture of him smoking weed. And then it's also text messages with him and a guy named Barney Farrar, who was essentially the DFO or the ops guy for the football team, talking about the light bill getting paid at his mom's place. Real nefarious shit here. Real high level Rick Ross, moving cane. Fuck, just it's insane to talk about this now. But that, with the Schefterisms of the NFL media, was enough to just start kneecapping him immediately. The interesting thing here is that Laremy was originally signed to a much smaller agency. I don't want to name them right now. I don't know if I should, but that agency lost out when Freeze came in and basically kind of strong-armed Laremy and his people into signing with Jimmy Sexton and CAA. That became a saving grace. And I certainly am not one to cape for CAA and Jimmy Sexton, but that became a saving grace because Sexton and his team are big enough and well connected enough to know what was happening and then create there's a phrase called parachute picking. And this is kind of when it was born, I think, in the modern age, where for sure, if you're in free fall, you're going to call someone who's 6, 7, 8, 10 picks down and say, if we get here, are you going to draft us? And the team will say, hey, you may have a dent and a scratch in terms of your character. We're going to take you. So that's happening with Thibodeau right now, because I've read several stories about him falling as far as like 8, 9, 10, all the way to 15. And so you're projecting, well, where's the parachute pick at? The Dolphins were the parachute pick because of Sexton. Sexton actually contacted the Dolphins and said, this is going to come out. He smoked weed in college. There's NCAA issues, which, by the way, don't affect you in the NFL. It's not real life. I've said this 1,000 times in my career. He didn't have a misdemeanor. It could have been a bigger problem had Laremy, this is not a joke. Had Laremy had a suspended driver's license, that would have been more of a concern to the Miami Dolphins or the NFL.
Or say an assault charge at Michigan. Oh, wait.
Exactly.
Wow. Or maybe a Mississippi State quarterback who had a DUI.
Yeah. Or, Jeffrey Simmons on the Titans, who is on videotape, beating a woman's face in. Like, these are the concerns when you're in the NFL. So it kind of backfired, and Sexton was able to move that into, like, he contextualized it, I should say. And the Dolphins were basically like, yep, no worries. There's a glare on your screen. I can't tell.
That's Hugh Freeze on NFL Network right now.
I can
found that ironic.
I can tweet him if you want to, and then he'll be in my DMs in 5 seconds.
He does more name searching than maybe Kiffin does. I don't know.
If you have a blue check, if you're a media member on Twitter, and I don't say blue check in like the pejorative conservative way, if you say something remotely critical of Hugh Freeze, there is a better than 50% chance he will be in your DMs or find your number and text you, I'd say within 48 hours. He might be busy today because, like Malik Willis is in Vegas and all that jazz. But like, by and large, on your average Tuesday, you can hit that and he will see it almost immediately. There are current Power 5 head coaches who search themselves on Twitter, and all of them have one thing in common. They're doing a shitty job coaching. Like all of them are hot seat adjacent. Just want to throw that out there as free advice.
So that is the oral history of the Laremy Tunsil.
I mean, in a very
mask.
chunky way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to take something away from this, if this was new news to you, you can go watch the documentary. I don't care. They already paid me for it. But I don't think this could break down the same way in 22. In fact, like I saw this yesterday and I laughed. Laremy is NFTing the photo, and
for charity, right?
I think it's great, but he's not even making any money off of it because I guess we should say this. Laremy lives happily ever after.
Uh-huh.
Like he's an NFL left tackle and a good one. He none of the bullshit around him at Ole Miss affected his ability to be an NFL all-pro caliber left tackle or right tackle. So now he's auctioning off this NFT and giving it to, I believe it is a charity that deals with cannabis crimes. So just people serving mandatory minimums or just people who are up against, misdemeanor charges specifically for marijuana possession or distribution. So
equally as stupid as NCAA violations.
So you can draw. I mean, here's the difference. 6 years ago, I remember exactly where I was. We were renovating our house. I was sitting in a tiny apartment watching it happen in Nashville, Tennessee. In 2022, I can come pick you guys up. We can get on I-24, and it's about a 3 hour and 5 minute drive to Southern Illinois, where we can go buy weed. You can go buy weed. In fact, there's a very famous picture that circulated on Twitter of someone with the Tennessee government plates. Steve, you know what I'm talking about? When you have plates on your car, parked in front of the dispensary in Southern Illinois. I can't remember the name of the town.
It's right across from Paducah, right? Like you get to Paducah and you go. Not that I know.
A little bit, yeah. Like if you
don't have to go to Carbondale.
No.
And by the way, don't go to Carbondale.
No, I was saying no. Yeah. Don't go to Carbondale. I know the coaches on that staff. But
I used to live in Carbondale when I was a kid.
So my point is that 6 years later, there is some ubiquity to recreational marijuana use, even amongst the pearl clutching upper middle class white people that sort of dominate outrage cycles. And I don't know if Hutchinson from Michigan, or just pick a name, it doesn't matter. If there's a picture that surfaces as the draft is going on of them smoking weed, I think the collective response would be a shrug. So I certainly think NCAA violations would not affect a draft stock anymore.
All right, progress. All right.
The interesting thing, does he own the photo that he's NFTing?
Probably not.
I was going to say, because if somebody else snapped it, they've got the copyright on it. They get to. Anyway, that's a side issue.
He's doing it for charity, so I hope the legality of it works. Normally, I hope every one of your NFTs fails miserably.
Yeah,
they're an environmental pop and the worst thing in the world. I will right-click every one of them I see.
No, I'm with you on that one. I don't think people understand the environmental impact of crypto and NFTs and all that stuff, but we can. That's a show and a topic for another podcast.
All those people should be rounded up and put in a camp.
Or just make them live in El Salvador, where it's legal tender and currency. All right, go ahead, Steve.
After a year of NIL here, what have we learned about kind of players and reputations and all these sorts of things? Because I think you're right. I mean, there are certain behaviors that have been normalized. I think weed even in the 6 years here since Tunsil has lost a little bit of its stigma. I mean, it's legal in so many states now on either a medical or just straight up basis that, it's not even illegal in a lot of places. The feds
I have CBD next to me right now.
I mean, the feds are talking about decriminalizing it, here right now. So I guess my question is, after a year of NIL and so supposedly, players being paid, what do we know?
That the market is going to have a lot of wild inefficiencies because, as most emerging markets in a capitalist economy do, speculators are going to come in. We don't understand the value of supply. We don't understand ROI yet on what it is you're getting for your money from the kid. And I think the biggest change between the black market economy of the last 100 years and now bringing some of it above board is that those who invest are seeking a more tangible ROI. And so because of that, you won't have as much good money after bad. Whereas like was it Fred Taylor a couple weeks ago was talking about taking an actual bag from
50 grand
Florida. Yeah. So that's not going to happen as often. However, I would point to Spencer Rattler. Like this is not, we have not figured out this system yet. Spencer Rattler got paid by Oklahoma boosters via NIL in the above board way and is now playing at South Carolina. So, I talked to a lot of compliance directors last summer as the avalanche was coming, and they had more concern about maintaining eligibility, whereas the coaches at some of the higher, more prestigious institutions were worried about. They didn't want to do it. No one was happy to do it. No one even wanted to utilize it in terms of an advantage in recruiting. What they wanted and what they were worried about was getting lapped by someone else. So if you're A&M, you didn't want Texas to unlock the way to do this and leave you behind. Those schools aren't rivals, of course, but you know what I mean.
Tennessee. Tennessee's doing this.
Everybody in some way, shape, or form is. I've seen the internal emails of 2 SEC schools on how they build it, and boy, those names are awfully familiar from my reporting. I got an email the other day. I got an email the other day, and it's basically like it's just a closed newsletter for people donating to a fund, and I was like, I know you, and I know you from the old days.
So there is one flow of information that has to happen on its own without any paper trail, and that is, who does Josh Heupel actually want on his team? Who does Nick Saban actually want on his team? Who does Kirby Smart actually want on his team? That's the one thing that still has to be sort of quote unquote under the table in all of this. But that information has to flow somehow, because you can't just pay $8 million for a quarterback that the coach doesn't want.
Yeah. If you're referring to the athletic story, I just, my head hurts thinking about how that thing was framed. I really do. They took an outlier instance, which, by the way, a lot of economists could show you that $8 million is market value given just the television rights fees that are flowing. Would you blink if there was an $8 million quarterback in the NFL? Would you blink? I can do this all day. The Athletic framed that story in such a way that it was designed to, I said this on our show. Do you guys remember the Satanic Panic? Steve, it's probably I'm a little too young for it, but in the 80s, I learned this in journalism school. There was this thing that happened in local newspapers and local TV stations in the 80s where there were all these stories about, hey, your kids might be worshiping the devil because of like Metallica records. And there was a legitimate concern. This is a real thing. You're seeing it now with this whole grooming bullshit, right?
Right.
That your kids were going to end up being taught by devil worshipers in their local high. This is a real thing. It happened. And it was a moral panic designed by one faction to generate hysteria against either something that wasn't real at all or for political gain or for whatever reason.
The stuff that you probably remember out of that is a term called backwards masking.
Yeah.
Where supposedly if you had vinyl and ran it backwards, that you were getting special messages from these Satan artists in the grooves of those records.
Yes, from Satan. Sure. No, this is real.
No, I know it is. I just spent 5 seconds actually thinking about it for the first time, and it just is. So
and this was a different time contextually in culture where, if the band was named Judas Priest or Black Sabbath. I drop my kids off at a Catholic school every day, and one of my son's favorite songs is Iron Man, for obvious superhero reasons, by a band named Black Sabbath. And I don't think anyone would ever put those two things together. I'm in a Catholic school parking lot blaring Black Sabbath because we're just different culturally, right? Like, I put it together because I think it's funny, but this is how NIL is being treated right now. Now, you want to know why? It's because we're all sourced out of the same pool. Everyone in college media is sourced out of the same pool. They have spent decades keeping us from having genuine, honest relationships and flows of information with the labor class. If you go to the University of Tennessee and you want to write a story, they would put you in front of Josh Heupel, Danny White, Rick Barnes, 1,000 times before they would leave you alone in a room with one athlete for 5 minutes.
Yep. It's
just that's how it is. That's nothing to do with UT. I just use them as an example. Shout out to Danny. He's a great dude. Because of this,
can't see the eyes rolling, by the way, on the podcast. Audio.
Look, no, he has gangster status.
I know how you feel.
He has gangster. I have awarded him gangster status, and so like I think he's doing a really good job. I think you want an AD you don't trust. I think that should be like that's an asset in the SEC. Like you want an AD who could have you rolled up in a carpet and thrown into off of a bridge somewhere in Johnson City. I think that's what you want at UT. I just don't feel the need to ignore that part of it. I think you should say that part out loud. Like Greg Byrne could have you killed. Mobile's got a lot of like brackish water. Like, I'm just telling you right now, Greg Byrne could have me killed if he wanted to. Danny White wants to have the ability to kill people like me. So
Scott Woodward.
Aspiring. Yeah. But if he doesn't get ROI off Kelly, they're going to kill him. I mean, like, yeah.
Right. It's all
laughs when I say this shit, but like, yeah, it's up until, look, it's all mob functionality up until the murders.
Everyone's got a boss.
And like being prosecuted. And if you take issue with that, like, I mean, there's a hospital embezzlement case for paying offensive linemen at LSU. Like, I love
children's hospital.
Yeah, people always accuse me of the brinksmanship in terms of the PR war with the SEC, and I'm like, y'all took the crazy person creed and made it your fucking like marketing slogan, you know. But no one likes that when I point out that like 10 years ago, a doctor in Kentucky branded a UK logo on a woman's like stomach or something, and it got out. Like that's what it just means. More means it means we're gonna poison your trees and burn your house down.
Right. Well, it's not any different than like this is what makes a great communication strategy. Though, like Make America Great Again is brilliant because of all the layers and because of what it means and because of how simple it is, because of the recall and because all the things like the negativity of it just means more is baked into the messaging. Like they know what they're doing until something really bad happens publicly. And they're like, oh God, the SEC doesn't condone this behavior. And I'm like, oh, shut the fuck up. so let me ask you, can I ask you about ROI? Cause I find that to be fascinating because I don't think this particular economic marketplace functions like a traditional economic marketplace because there's a huge, like a 5-star quarterback's a 50-50 hit rate. So there's a big chunk of this money that's going to be wasted. But I also think it's interesting that you are more valuable as a recruit to some degree while you still are selling hope and potential to a fan base versus actually showing up on campus. Like, I think you're going to get your money's worth in the last year of their high school season. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, because right now, like, again, we'll just use Nico because it's the thing that we can talk about, but like he's earning back some of that money already. And he has not even played it down or even gotten to campus yet. So there is some actual economic value there for the people investing in him.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's not going to function like a normal marketplace where if it's a bad business decision, businesses stop doing it. That's not going to happen, right? Because
the dollar figure is going to adjust whether or not these things are successful or they fail. Every economist has said this about NIL. It's just we're going to have a weird, wonky period where there's going to be undervaluing and overvaluing, and people are going to eventually, over time, look at a data set and start setting market prices. This is basic macroeconomics. And so to go back to the hysteria thing for a second, it's disingenuous reporting, in my opinion, to go and take an outlier case that's $8 million, which, again, is not that much money contextually when you look at how much money the SEC brings in revenue. It's disingenuous to do that because we're all still figuring this out. We're figuring this out in the way in which we are because the NCAA and their stakeholders, so that's all the SEC schools specifically and the Big Ten and everyone else, shirked the responsibility for decades. Yeah. And when the thing finally collapsed on itself, they all raised their hand, and now they're going privately to people in the media who are sympathetic to the cause and saying, college football's a mess. No, this shit was coming for 30 years and you ignored it because you wanted to stand on moral high ground, or you were benefiting from a business model where the labor had to be unpaid. That's the problem.
What does Notre Dame and Jack Swarbrick benefit from saying the quiet part out loud this week in an interview about the split coming in college football, the finances of it, and that basically, I think the quote is something along the lines of there are so many schools trying to leave their conferences.
Right.
What's the point behind that message from Jack?
Well, he's the only one who could say that of relevance because they're not in a conference, and so he's working from a position of power, which he should. I didn't think it was that big a deal, nor did I think it was a revelation, because all he's saying is those with moneyed interests are going to, those with like-minded moneyed interests are going to work together. So there will be a consolidation where we're entering a phase in which Ohio State has more in common with Alabama than they do with Michigan State. That's it. Michigan State's not a great example because they've been very aggressive, but Ohio State has very, very little in common with Indiana. or Purdue, but they have a lot in common with Florida and Alabama.
Yep.
That's it. That's basically, I think, what he was leaning towards. I think autonomy is a word that hasn't been spoken a lot this cycle, which is weird because all the behavior I'm seeing just screams autonomy, especially with Swarbrick saying like, hey, there won't be an NCAA, because there won't be. Emmert stepping down is just, it felt very inevitable. It didn't come as a shock to me at all.
Yep.
So that was my next question, is that, of the pro clutchers that are out there maybe pining for an NCAA era that, had all of its own problems. Where are we headed with the NCAA and these sort of perceptions? Because the things that we're talking about that would have all been infractions before are now out in the open and people are being paid for. And in light of that, improper contact with a recruit seems like such a pissant sort of thing that, when NIL deals are being cut with high school seniors for millions of dollars.
Right. So the answer right now is that everyone is very flat-footed. I won't say they were caught flat-footed because, again, we said, hey, storm's coming. And it wasn't just the media. I mean, there were industry analysts saying this. There were other athletic directors saying this. There were studies done inside of Indianapolis. I had a very long, interesting talk with someone who is recently departed from the NCAA about a couple weeks ago. And they confirmed a lot of what I knew from outside sources or people at schools, which was there was a group inside of Indianapolis that said we have to do something. But the position of like Mark Emmert and the position of those individuals, it is designed to create inertia. He's a whipping post, right? He's a scarecrow. He's a lot of things. That's what that position was designed to be. It was never designed to rule or be a commissioner. People always talk about like, well, how come he doesn't act like Roger Goodell or Adam Silver? That's the last thing they want. They don't want to be ruled. They want a proxy when they need a proxy.
Yep.
They want to kind of throw him out there when they need someone to land on a grenade. And so I think the people who wanted to progress the NCAA into something that's more functional, like you're talking about, like, hey, how are we going to handle these situations? And like, what is the legislation going to look like? They would present things at their convention meetings and that's when all the schools come and vote on this stuff. And what they found was it was easier for the majority of the stakeholders in the NCAA to pass the buck and say, we don't know, or make Congress make us, than it was to develop their own system. It's a lot. I mean, it's very similar to like Congress. It's very similar to our American government in general. So
the NCAA asking Congress for help is one of the funniest things I've ever heard of.
I think at that point it was, I had an argument with Alex Kirshner, my co-host, yesterday about this, that he thought they went into Alston and that they really thought they were going to win. And I'm convinced that they knew they were going to die. I mean, a 9-0 decision from the Supreme Court is impressive. I think they knew they were walking. I think they knew they were walking in there to take an ass whooping so that they could essentially walk out of that and then go to their stakeholders at the NCAA and say, we tried. Sorry, guys. Now it's out of our hands.
The fact that they've been studying this internally should surprise no one who is a student of history or the tobacco industry, which studied these things and knew all of the effects for years before they were ever forced to change their habits.
And when they had big enforcement cases between the time of the post Miami Nevin Shapiro reorg, because that's when they completely overhauled enforcement, to basically this past year where NIL starts. I'll put my hands on the camera. That's a distinct period of time. It's basically the death of the Old West, the end of prohibition, however you want to contextualize it, where the old ways are dying, but you really are going to fight against the dying of the light. This was North Carolina. I'm trying to think. North Carolina, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, all that. Obviously, there's 3 or 4 other bigger cases you could probably think of. I think the attempt to police Baylor after Penn State falls apart is a huge part of this as well. This was a period of time in which internally they knew it was impossible to regulate some of this stuff. It was impossible to stop, for instance, the sale of alcohol towards the end of prohibition. Probies around the country were going back to Washington and saying, this is impossible. If anything, all we've done is promote ingenuity, and we have taught a criminal class how to be smarter.
And created a sport. And created a sport.
Yes, and created NASCAR. Fuck yeah. World's first dirt track. So that is basically what enforcement said for this, like, I don't know, I can't remember the end of Shapiro and the reorg. Let's just say a 15-year period, right? That's the time in which, upon high at the emirate level, they said, well, our stakeholders are saying, like, we have to toe the line and keep the example. We can't let these kids be paid. And the people doing the work are saying, hey, this is fruitless. This is not going to work. Yeah. So I think the MO at that time was to just find one or two cases that would scare the other schools into at least the image of compliance. But that didn't work either.
Man, nobody will unify the most polarized and divided Supreme Court in the history of the world like the NCAA. Stephen, how should college football fans, and we'll let you go on this, how should college football fans be parsing information that they see with all of these big overarching changes that are clearly coming, inevitable, and a part of our sport?
Yeah.
How can a smart, rational fan stay grounded and understand exactly what's happening?
Everything with a grain of salt, I would say, for the next probably 2 off-season cycles, because remember, we have television coming up too. I'm not trying to stack this here, but most of the major conference deals are in reorg right now. They're in negotiation. So very interested about the Fox Big Ten thing. Very interested to see if CBS does pivot and try and help the Pac-12 get back on its feet. The Pac-12 is in such bad shape right now. That will inform the future more than NIL, believe it or not, because the rich are going to stay rich and the poor are going to stay poor. The one word that I would look for as a canary in the coal mine is when they start talking about autonomy. And what that means is, will Alabama live by a set of rules that Florida lives by, but not Louisiana Monroe and not New Mexico State and not even, honestly, Boise or Houston's going to Big 12, but like a splintering off of those 130 odd FBS teams will probably be more important as a fan to you than NIL. NIL is just designed to scare you.
It has no impact on your Saturday. It has zero impact on your Saturday.
I mean, if you think, like, if Tennessee has a $6 million quarterback and they win 9 games, like, those things, I guess, technically are related, but it was going to happen anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just that now we see where the checks are coming from.
It's above the table. And if that bothers you, if that bothers you, know that nothing has changed. Know that nothing has changed.
Yeah, I am fascinated where the line is and how many are above it and how many are below it, because that's really all that's going to matter moving forward at some point. And if all those TV contracts for the Pac-12, Big 10, and Big 12 end up around 2032, 2033, when the next 2 for the ACC and SEC run out, that's basically what Swarbrook is talking about. So keep an eye on the length of those contracts. Stephen, tell everybody all the things you're doing, where they can find you and all that good stuff at 38
I work at Secret Base. I occasionally write for the Post in Washington, and I run Split Zone Duo, splitzonduo.com. And if I do anything else, I'm going to die. That's it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving us some time, and we are honored to take a few minutes off the end of your life. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Going gray, boys.